Next month we'll have actually the Pacific Northwest Sculptors group coming in. But today we're talking to Sam Yamauchi, and Ruth Ross and Sharon Svec. Thank you guys for coming. And then I think you'll all have a little bit to say first, and then we can open up for a Q&A. Ruth's first.
Okay. Am I on?
Yeah.
So the mics don't project, they just go to the iPad.
Oh, okay. All right.
You'll have to do your own projection.
Okay, I can manage that. I have a special affinity for Yiddish. I'm not a Yiddish speaker, but my parents spoke Yiddish when they didn't want us to understand what they were saying. And as part of my aging and returning to my roots, I decided to visit the language and take some pride in setting the words in type and then stitching them, because I felt that process really, truly honored them. So that's what you see here. My dolls speak for themselves. They've been speaking to me for years, but the Yiddish. So I just wanted to first just describe briefly the origins of Yiddish. I had a friend of mine brought a friend of his to my studio, and I was just starting the Yiddish series, and he told me about his partner who had gotten into an accident while he was in East Berlin, so it was many years ago. And the ambulance driver had to come, and of course, the poor victim said, "Do you speak English?" "No." "Do you speak French?" "No." "Do you speak Yiddish?" "Yiddish, yes." So it's sort of a universal language, and it also has its own implicit charms. And I'll just read one short little paragraph that I got from Leo Roston's book, The Joys of Yiddish, which is a marvelous, marvelous book, if any of you can get your hands on it. Yiddish is the Robin Hood of languages. It steals from the linguistically rich to give to the fledgling poor. It shows not the slightest hesitation in taking in house guests, to whom it gives free room and board regardless of genealogy, faith, or exoticism. A memorable remark by a journalist, Charles Rappaport, runs, "I speak 10 languages, all of them Yiddish." So Sam, would you like to join in?
Yes. I'll say something. Yeah, I'm Sam Yamauchi, and I started doing stitching in the last couple of years. I was a mixed media painter, and then a couple of years ago, I started making these small mixed media books that I called messy books, and they were just like these real spontaneously written, intuitively painted, put together books. So when I was invited here, one of the things that I think it's just kind of like on your form letter, it says something like, we support large and experimental work or something like that. And I was like, oh, I could do large and experimental work. So I was originally going to do like an 8-foot square panel. And then I realized, well, there's no way I could fit that in a sewing machine. So I broke it and I decided, well, I'll just make it into a messy book, a gigantic deconstructed messy book. And I thought that because of the title was Stitching Stories, like what's the most important story I could think about would be just like our stories of who we think we are and how everything that we do is reflected in that, from that story, and how we approach life. Everything is about that. And so this was sort of a representation of a contemplative practice that I have, where I ask myself, like, who am I? And just keep going and going with that question until you kind of get out of the story and get to like a essential, who am I? If you ever get there. And my friend, I wanted someone to do this practice with. So my friend Meg, who's sitting right there, she was like, I'll do it with you. And so like, this is great. We'll do this practice and then we'll write it down. I'll write down everything we say. And my husband was like, you should get like a Google what is it called? Like transcript. And we're like, oh, that's a great idea. So I did that. And then when I listened back, where I looked back to how it transcribed it, it was like, there were so many mistakes in it. Like it was, at first it was like, didn't really make any sense. But when I started looking at it closer, I was like, this is actually really profound and poetic. And so I just wrote a lot of the stuff verbatim from the transcription, and then sort of edited and put it together. So it became these chapters that I thought were really kind of poetic and funny and unusual. And then I illustrated them. So that's what this is, a deconstructed book.
Sharon, Svec, and my typical work that the community knows me for is UV sensitive dye onto textiles. And I hang those like tapestries. I started doing dancers, and so I would hang them away from the wall so they would like kind of move with the breeze. And that's fun and great, but as you know, in the Northwest, there's not a lot of sun during the winter. So I have to do other things. And I did a little bending metal earlier in the winter, but as spring was approaching, I was looking down our hillside and noticing all the English ivy and thinking, oh, like it's starting to go up the trees again. It's just gonna keep growing. Maybe I can do something with that. And I did do some basket weaving for a number of years. I belonged to the Columbia Basket Weavers Guild for a number of years. And so I thought, well, I'll weave some baskets. So I pulled it all down, or off the trees. I enlisted my partner to come, and we pulled a bunch of vines into the house, and I started bending them, and gosh darn it if they wouldn't go into a circle shape. And I thought, well, no use in fighting it, you know. I try to go with the flow, and so stood back and looked at it, and it looked like the shape of an eye socket. And I thought, okay, well, this is what it wants to be, you know. So I just went with that theme, and I made one eye, and then it just kept talking to me and saying, okay, you need to make another one now. I need more eyes. Like I can't see with one eye. And so I felt like I was having this conversation with the forest and this conversation with the natural environment here, where I was just trying to please it by making these eyes so it could see. And I have a statement upstairs to that effect, which also notes that I'm not from here. I grew up in Southern Illinois. And if you've ever been to that part of the world, it's below the farmland of mid-state. It's below the city of Chicago. It's far, far south. And there's a lot of cliffs and caverns and caves and beautiful, beautiful deciduous forest. And I struggled when I moved out here because people kept saying, oh, wasn't it beautiful out here in the Pacific Northwest? And I said, well, yeah, it is. But it's not my beautiful. Like, it's not the beautiful that I know. And so after some time, and I think that this project really helped me come to accept and be engaged with the beauty of the Northwest. Any questions for any of us?
This is like the first chapter, and it says number 1, labels, and it's a person talking. I'm an oceanarium scavenger, an evolutionary astrologer helping people with their Saturn return. I have a lot of identities, like a bear and a cat. I wear many hats. I'm a daughter, sister, friend, and mother. All these labels, foreign, assigned to me. But I'm into it. I imagine it. I have a very good left frame, right brain, left brain. No, not that. I've traveled for a long time, was born in seeds over San Francisco, hanging out there, not in Tyree. Do you have a light? Do you have the time? I'm sorting it all out still after all this time. I believe in compassion. I'm prostrating emotions. I have faith that I am not too mean. I'm a physical body experience, Flanagan's experiment, away in a remote corner of the universe. So each one is just a, I can't think what the word is.
Continuation or?
Well, it's like, yeah, each one is a continuation. And then what Meg and I did was we took turns asking each other, who am I? Tell me who you are. And so each story was like the response that we gave. And as you read it, the answers kind of get less complicated and more simple till you would get to the very end, where it's very much like there's kind of, the answer is someplace and you have to get there. Like it's like there's like a secret inside, and that's who I am. So that's what it is. Yeah, I didn't think about how, I know they don't really teach cursive in grade school anymore. I didn't think about that. Yeah, and you don't really, yeah, and we don't really see cursive, you know, so maybe that's kind of part of the charm now. You can't read it. Also, I have to say that I can't do cursive. I can only do cursive on a sewing machine. I don't actually know how to, like, I would have to break each letter down and like tie it off, right? Like, I don't know how to do it otherwise. The illustrations came after I had done all the writing, and I had divided it into these chapters. So like that illustration goes with that poem, with that writing. And the process that I use when I do mixed media paintings is I just lay down lots of colors and layers and marks, and then I start to see imagery in there, and I start pulling out some of the imagery. These don't have as much imagery as, like, the very end was one that really had like people in it. Yeah, and then I just wanted to add stitching to it because I'm doing the stitching now, and that's what I'm doing with like these mixed media books that we're making. Yeah, and I just wanted to get like kind of an idea of what's in that poem into the picture.
You mean what I use to stitch on? I try to use only found textile. I like to use textile that has seen better days, because to me, it has a whole history in the weaving itself that I may not know about. I like to use the backsides of embroidered pieces because to me, they're far more interesting than the front. I just think, here's where the work took place. Here was the accidental scribbling. So I tend to use the back of embroidered pieces. I get a lot of wonderful material from the Treasure House, which is a lovely resale store in our community. Some of these colorful, this is the colorful patchwork behind it. I had given a show at Lake Oswego of my work based upon my parents' relationship to Judaism and communism. And a woman who had seen it sent me an email, and she said she had this wonderful fabric from the 1940s. She didn't know what to do with it. Do you want it? I said, yes. And it is so filled with pleasure and history, and I love sewing on it and ripping it apart and repairing holes on it. And it lends itself very much to the feeling that I want my work to have, which is history and love. Trying not to be too sentimental. That's another story. So I'm just always, I like dish rags. I mean, I like dish rags that people throw out. They're my favorites. Yes.
Ruth, for those of us that don't know a little Yiddish, could you translate?
I could translate any one of those words. Is there one in particular? I tried to. Balabust is a housewife. Balabust is a housewife, and in this particular one, this stymied me for a long time. I knew what I wanted the word to look, but it took me a long time to reach back and remember that from my mother's time, housewives, balabustas, how they'd spend the time when they weren't balabustering was playing canasta. And so gradually these cards started to appear. I had a very old tablecloth that was a poker tablecloth, which actually had imprinted in it cigarette butts and stuff like that. And so, and half drunk drinks. I mean, it was a crazy tablecloth. So I extracted those cards. But my desire in all of the work is to bring warmth and a sense of a love and openness to the words, because that's what they represent to me. I do not speak Yiddish. I know these words. Every New Yorker I know these words. Few Portlandians know these words. I was eating lunch and I got some lunch on me, and I said, good, I could tell people this is schmutz. So you just sort of keep your ears and sensitivities open. Yes.
There's strings hanging down here. So a particular impulse that comes from.
Oh, I love things that are just sort of hanging off with a life of their own. It's like, hello, you're nice, okay. Because I've always been kind of a sloppy artist in any event. I really am. And I couldn't work in metal because metal requires precision, drove me nuts. But to me, a hanging thread is just another part of the textile that has a right to be there and tells me more about it. So I do mostly try to leave those things happen. I'm sorry, I didn't hear
The
you.
gel print that you used. Can you talk about the gel prints?
Oh, okay, yeah. That was before I discovered cyanotype. So these, which is what I do now, but these gel prints I discovered, well, the gel prints are a gel plate. It's a very floppy plate, which you can apply paint with a roller and then just do anything to it. You could put texture under it. You could put texture over it, but it's like a monoprint. You do one and you can never replicate it. So I just did a lot on that on organza, which was my favorite textile because you can see through it. And it's so feminine in a way that I would never allow myself to be. So, but the images were from a technique, a material called laser trans, which no longer exists, but you could put it through your printer and it creates a transfer situation where you could then iron it to silk. Very, very temperamental, but I like that because it was a way of, again, of not controlling what was happening. And so I had to accommodate what was happening. But they stopped making that material, unfortunately, and I can't find it, so.
So you have two pieces over here that say Oi,
Yes,
and one is the royal Oi.
it's
And the other,
clearly.
can you compare the two? Why do you
Well, the
have two
royal
Ois?
Oi has lace.
That's not it.
And the people's Oi does not have lace. It has, in fact, lots of, the people's Oi actually has a piece of fabric that my husband brought back from India that is very much a people's piece of fabric from India. And the background is an old curtain that somebody gave me. So those are my two distinct. But Oi requires, there's so much you can do with Oi. So much. I could do a whole body of work just on Oi.
The Oi show. What does it mean? I mean, I hear it in movies.
Oi
and TV and
is,
stuff.
oh no. Oi, it can be that. It can have, there's 100 meanings and it depends upon how you invoke it. But oi generally means, oh my God. It could be something good, like, oh my God, that's wonderful. Or, oh my God, they're dropping the bomb, okay?
Exclamation.
Yes, or not.
Well, I think that the very first line, I'm a oceanarian scavenger, an evolutionary astrologer. I just loved, I'm an oceanarian scavenger, an evolutionary astrologer. I just loved those two words. And Meg is actually an evolutionary astrologer, but I love the fact that the first thing that came out was an oceanarian scavenger. There was just, what about, I don't know, there was just something about that that just grabbed me. And then there were just other things in that one where that just reminded me a lot of Meg, but they weren't, like the Finnegan's experiment and the just all these things that were just off a little bit, but still like really seemed like you, right? And the Tyree, I'm not in Tyree. I don't know. I can't explain it, all of those things, but there were just these little things that just seemed like the translator was, knew something more than it really did.
It was a very dramatic
Yeah.
It was sort of unplanned, but that both of our work is based on, translations of some kind. They're very interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
I'm generally processing my own experience, and I hope that others have an experience by viewing or participating in the work. And so, full disclosure, I work at the gallery. And so I was a little self-conscious about even being part of the artist talk. But in the last show, there was, I had a piece on the wall, and I had overheard them say, "Oh, my work's not romantic like this piece is." And I felt a little furious inside, like, that is not a romantic piece of work. And so, I thought I better come to the artist talk in case anybody has any confusion. But truly, just like interpretation, I think Ruth talked about Yiddish being 10 languages, and Sam talked about how there's, things get lost in translation, and it's bound to happen. It's always going to happen with art and expression, and you really can't let that hold you back. You just have to keep expressing what you need to express. Well, the spacing, my first intention with the placement was I wanted people to feel welcome to walk into the space and walk amongst the eyes. And so I started with the smaller eye, the more approachable eye, and then went to the medium one and into the larger one to kind of draw the viewer in. The other thing I realized was that all the overhead spotlights were a distraction. So I took them all out except for the ones that I couldn't take out. And that really helped draw attention to because otherwise you walk up there, and if there's not like a big colorful piece on the wall, you will be distracted by the bright lights above you.
It adds to the mystery.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to, when I'm talking about walking amongst the eyes, project that feeling of walking amongst the forest, walking amongst the trees. And, sometimes if you're not distracted by the person you're walking with, or if you're by yourself or whatever, you might start to see things in the trees. You might start to see shapes. So.
I like that, walking among the eyes, because it just made me think about all of us here. My story about identity, like walking among the eyes,
Any of you have any plays or shows coming up?
I have a show coming up in June at the LK Gallery. LK. And it's textiles, embroidery, machine embroidered, hand embroidered, narrative stories, and they're big. I'm really excited because they're really big. And I have one that's all eyes. It's just like eyes all.
Ah. I have a show in next February at Gallery 114, of which a wonderful collective gallery, which I have been a member for a while, and it's going to be about, again, harkening back to my past, a letter my mother wrote me, and she told me to not open it until after she died, and then 15 years later I opened it up, and it was full of love. She was always full of love, but in this case it was in writing. And so I'm doing a whole body of work based upon those words as a way of just commemorating her and my love for each other. So that will be in February, yoicks, February. Oh my God. What's
That
that?
sounds really cool.
Yeah, thank you. Again, it's on snatches of textiles. I'm working very hard. The hardest thing for me, and this is going to sound like a really stupid thing to say, but I'll say it anyway. The hardest thing for me is keep something from being pretty. I mean, it's so easy for me to slip into that, and it's so satisfying for me to create something that's pretty and glib, and I take great pleasure in it. But in this particular work about my mother, I'm really working very hard on the sense of poignancy and working very closely with specific words from her letter, like worry, sleepless nights. She had a lot to recount to me that way. So I'm looking forward to having that work up.
No. Yeah, I'll be doing some more printing. I want to take my, historically I've used existing photographs from the early 1900s of modern dancers, and so I want to start creating my own photographs now that I've honed my technique using other people's photos. I'd like to, I think the next step is to use my own photos. So. Well, I've done some of my daughter out down the gorge, and so I'll be working with those. And I'd rather not use myself, but I have some of myself. I am the easiest model to schedule and the cheapest. So
Yes, Judy.
Are you dancing?
I used to dance a lot. I taught ballroom dance, and I did choreography for a long time. So.
Any more questions?
Thank you.